Live. All right, it looks like we're live. All right, everyone. Welcome. This is Reach Out Academy's first ever web broadcast for a lesson. My name is Joe Buchanan. I'm going to be working with you today for our workshop. To give you a little information about myself, some of you know me, maybe not. I can't see you. But I'm from New York. I've been working at Reach Out for about 3 months. And I think it's great. It's a lot of fun. So today, the workshop that we're going to be working on is about CV writing. Normally, I would ask you questions about it, but before I do that, I'll tell you a few different things that you can do to ask me questions. So, in the section below for comments, if you have any questions at all, feel free to click there and post a comment. Every 10 or 15 minutes or so, I'm going to stop and answer any comments or questions you have, but you just will need to wait for your questions to be answered, okay? All right, so let's begin. The first thing that we're going to look at when we're talking about CV writing is the word CV. What does CV mean? Or what is a CV? So a CV is a document that you give to a potential employer or a place you want to work that describes your skills or your qualifications for that job. Another word for a CV is a resume. Normally, in places like Europe or Australia or here in Egypt, people will call it a CV. But if you were applying for a job in the United States, they might call it a resume. This is the same thing. There is no difference. And CV itself means curriculum vitae, which is a nice way of saying, you know, the important information about you. So, of course, when we begin, we always have to think that there are different kinds of CVs, right? And you should never write only one CV. Why? Because each CV will be different for the job you are applying for. So, if I am applying to be a teacher, my CV will not be the same one that I use if I am applying to be a journalist. They will be different. And we will see a little later on how exactly they're going to be different. So first, though, we're going to talk about two kinds of CVs today. The first one we're talking about is called a chronological CV. Chronological. C-H-R-O-N-O-L-O-G-I-C-A-L. This means a resume that is in order of time, right? It's a resume that talks about the order you do things in a specific time. Now, anytime we're talking about a CV, though, there is information that we need to include and also information that we don't want to include. So every CV should always start with a very easy thing, your name, right? You always want to include your name, and you will, because this tells the employer how to, or who you are. Other things that a resume should always hold are your address, where you live. This gives your future employer a way to contact you. Or, for example, if you are living in Cairo but applying for a job in Alexandria, they will be able to see that you don't live there right now. The next piece of information that you want to include is your contact information. Now, normally, these are two different things. The first would be your mobile number. You want to include your mobile number because, again, it tells your future employer how they can contact you. They can either give you a call. The other thing, our other way of contacting someone, would be your email. So you want to choose a good email, right? Or provide an email so that the employer can contact you. But with the email, you want to be a little bit careful. remember, whenever we're doing a CV, we always want to make it professional, right? We always want to make it clear, easy to understand, and also it needs to make us look good. If we don't look good, we're going to get the job. So when you're writing your email, we've all had emails before which are funny or cute. Should we use that email in a resume or in a CV? Probably not. So here is an example, one time, of a CV that I received. And it looked very nice, and everything was good. But when I looked at the person's email to contact them, instead of having it be their name or their abbreviations or a professional email, their email was blackbeautylover@gmail.com. Now, I don't think that was the person's real name. And as I was typing in their response to it, I was typing in the email address, and I was like, this is not an email that I want to be sending, or not an address I want to be sending an email to. Very professional, and it makes you look bad. So, very fast, just to go over the basics of the first part of your resume, the first part of your CV, there are 4 things you want to include. The first one is your name, your address, your phone number, your mobile number, and a professional email. Not one that says King Joe or you know, Joey Joe. No, it needs to be professional, and it makes you look nice. So those are the 4 things. Name, phone number, address, professional email. Okay? These should be at the beginning of every resume, right? It just gives you a simple idea of other things that you should include. But when we're talking about what to include on a resume, about your basic information, I've seen some other stuff which should not be there. Now, for example, in Egypt, most people want to list their military service status, right? This is a common thing on an Egyptian CV, right? You can say that you are in the army or not in the army, when you were in the army. We don't want to put this on an English CV. Why? It's simply not important, right? People don't care about it. Most of the jobs you're applying for, it's not important for them. And it leads back to one of our big rules, which we're going to talk about a lot today, which is that when we are writing a CV, we want it to be long or short? Short. We want our CVs to be very short. Ideally, at best, it should only be 1 page, maybe 2, maybe 2. But if you're listing a bunch of information, lots and lots of information, you don't want it to be very long. Why? Well, think about it like this. You are the employer. You are going to go and read people's CVs. So, what you're going to look at first is their name and information, but you're not looking at one CV for one person. You're looking at dozens, hundreds of CVs, right? Your CV is just one small CV in a pile. You want yours to stand out, and if the employer looks at your CV and sees that it's 5 pages long, do you think they will read all of it? No. They're not going to read that. They don't have time. They're busy. So they might look at it and be like, too long. It's not going to help you. So you don't want to include unnecessary things. So for example, here, you don't need to include your military status. But let's think of some other things that you don't want to include as your basic information on the CV. What about your birthday? Do you think that you need to include your birthday? No. It is not necessary that you include your birthday, right? You don't want to tell them that you were born on October 14th, 1985. It's not important. It's not going to help. At the same time, you don't need to include your age. You don't need to say how old you are. If you are simply telling them, okay, well, this is who I am, your age is not important. You could be 21 years old, 51 years old. Your age does not matter, only your qualifications. So don't include your age. What are some other things that we don't need to say? Do I need to tell them that I'm married? No. That is my personal information. It is not important to my employer if I'm married or not. In fact, they shouldn't ask me about it. Maybe later on, but on my CV, it is not necessary that I say that I am married. And another one, you'd think this is funny, but it's true. You don't need to say if you are a man or a woman. Now, normally, you would be able to say that you could tell from someone's name. So, for example, my name is Joe. That's a very common man's name. But if you were saying your name in English is something like Casey, or in Arabic, the name Aled, sometimes boys have that name, sometimes girls have that name. The reason we don't want to list our gender, if we were a boy or a girl, is because it's not important. And if the organization you are looking for is looking for either men or for women, you probably don't want to be a part of that, because if they're asking that, it's not professional, right? So you should never feel that you need to include any personal information on your resume, any private information, right? If you're married or if you're single, if you're a man or a woman, right? You don't need to include this information. And this includes all things that are private personal information. Do you think that it is important if my employer knows that I am a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew? Is my religion important? No. It's my religion. It's private. Only I should be talking about that. Right? Or it's about my relationship with my religion, not my boss's. Sometimes in Egypt they ask you that, but in an English CV, you should not include it. The same way, you should not include anything about your politics, right? Did you support Sisi? Did you support Sabahi? Did you support Morsi? It's not important for your CV. You do not need to include your political opinions or your religious opinions. So really, here, let's review and create a short list. So, what do you think is an important thing to include in your CV? There are 4 things. In the general information, the first thing is your name. The second thing is the third thing is your mobile number. And the fourth thing is a professional email. Okay? Things that we don't want to include, it's a big list. So first, any personal or private information. So this would be something like your religion, your politics, your marital status. Are you single or married? Right? If you have children, if you are a man, if you are a woman, how old you are, your birthday. You don't want to include these things on a resume because, 1, they make the resume too long, and 2, they are not things that your employer needs to know about you, right? So it is not my employer's business if they want to know my hair color or if they want to know my mother's name. This is not important for them, so I'm not going to tell them, okay? What I'm going to do is we are going to pause for a moment, and I will take any questions you have so far about things that we include in the general information of a CV, or the things that we do not include. Okay? So type any questions you have in the comments, and I will look at them to see if there is anything or any questions you have. So just one moment. Let me see if I can get to the comments page. Sorry, the internet here is quite slow. So please take a moment and post any comments you might have, or any questions that you have. All right? Just feel free to post any comments or questions, and I will answer them here. So I have to wait a few minutes. I hope everyone's doing well today. It was very hot out yesterday, and the day before. I went swimming. I don't really know why I'm telling you this. I'm just waiting to see if there are any questions. So I hope you were staying cool and relaxed. So let's see. All right, so here we have a question from Safwan, right? Safwan writes, is my photo important? Now, many times on an Egyptian resume, they will ask you for your photo. But on an English resume, it is not necessary. I would say that if they really need a photo of you, they can ask for one to be submitted, but for me, I would never submit a photo on a resume the first time I sent it in. One, because I don't like my picture being everywhere, but also, it's not really important, right? It's common here in Egypt, and if they ask, you should give it to them. But if they don't ask, I don't think it's important. All right. Are there any other questions or comments? Any other questions or comments? Okay, so here's another question. All right, in some jobs, they focus on age and they think it's important. This is a question from Ahmed. So, yes, that is true, but I would say that it is not always necessary, right? It is not always necessary to include your age. If they ask you for it, yes, you can provide it. But on the first CV, right, when I send it in for the not include my age, right? So things like my age or a photo, it's not necessary. And remember, we're talking about something a little bit different than the Egyptian CV. We're talking about an English CV. So some things that are appropriate on an Egyptian CV, like photos or age or what your military status is, they are not necessary on an English CV. All right, we had another question. What is the name of the CV? You said there were two kinds. What is the name of the first kind? The first kind of CV I will post in the comments, but there are two kinds. The one we are talking about now is called a chronological CV. Right? Hold on, I'm just posting the name in the thing in the comments. And the second one, which we will talk about later, is called a skills CV. Right? Normally, we want to make a chronological CV, but there is a time when it is good to make a skills CV. And we will look at that in a few moments. All right. Any other questions? Take a moment if you have any other questions you want to submit, or we will continue. And remember, the difference between a skills CV and a chronological CV is that a chronological CV lists the things you have done, your qualifications, in order. It tells you what you did first, then second, then third, then fourth. This is the standard CV, and the one you should use most of the time. However, there is a time to use a skills CV, which we will talk about a little bit later. Okay? So let me check one more time for questions to see if there are any other questions. Okay, here we have a question about, what about my hobbies? Where can I write them in my CV? All right, we will talk about this in a minute, about hobbies and other things, because that's for something a little bit later. So next, because we're getting into the next part of the workshop, we're going to talk about the next part of a chronological CV, right? So we talked about our basic information, what we put and what we don't put, okay? In a chronological CV, the next part is almost always your education, okay? And this is what university you went to. When you're writing a chronological CV, right, you should include your education. Now, what you want to include with your education is a few different things. You want to first say, what degree do you have? Do you have a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a PhD, right? What kind of degree do you have? So first, you want to write the name of the degree. Do you have a bachelor's degree, a master's, a PhD, and then the university you got it from? Right? So maybe you could say that you have a Bachelor of Arts from Cairo University. After that, you want to include a few other points. The first one would be your major. This is just your field of study. Did you study chemistry, engineering, political science, business and marketing? You want to say what your field of study was. And if you have a second field of study, like a minor or something that was not your primary, your big area of study, but something smaller, like a focus, you could include that. Another good thing to include on your CV with education is any awards you got from the university. Did you get an award for having the highest mark? Were you the top of your class? Did you get an award for being outstanding in a contribution to a journal? Anything like this is also good because it makes you look good, right? If you are getting awards from your university, it makes you look like a very qualified candidate that someone will want to hire. That's good for you. All right. And then also, we want to remember, though, when we're talking about education, not all of us studied in just one place. Many of us have maybe a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. You want to include all of them, right? So let's say, for example, for me, let's say I have a PhD in literature. I have a PhD in literature from Harvard University. So I also have a master's degree in journalism from AUC, the American University in Cairo. And I have a bachelor's degree in arts from a bachelor's degree in English from, I don't know, let's say New York University. Now, when I include these schools, I want to include all of them. But which one do you start with? What do you think? You start with the highest, right? Whatever your highest form of education is. So, if your last degree was you got a master's, you put that first. Your master's degree from from AUC in journalism with a minor in politics. And then, After that, you say where you got your bachelor's degree from. So first master's, then bachelor's. Or if your first is a PhD, you go PhD, master's, bachelor's. Okay? What about high school? Do you think that we should include high schools? No, probably not. So maybe if you went to a very, very famous or very good international school for high school, maybe. You do not need to include your high school on your CV. Why? It's not important. It doesn't tell you anything specific. Or you don't need to include the scores you got on your exams. Remember, one of the big things to remember about CV writing is you want to make it short, right? Maybe 1 page at most. If I write many, many things about, I don't know, the different classes I took at university, the grade I got in each one, I can include it, but it's not necessary. I don't have to, because it makes my CV too long. If my employer is interested in me, and they say, oh, you studied journalism at AUC, they can ask me for more information. But on just a CV, it's not necessary. And they don't need to know every single course I took, and every single thing I read, and every single grade I got. It's not important. They're just looking for a main idea about you. All right? So here are the key things to remember in education. You want to first put your highest education, the first thing. So if your highest level is a master's, put that first. If your highest level is a bachelor's, put that first, right? For each degree you have, you should tell them your major. First thing, your field of study. The second thing is your minor, or your focus, if you have one, right? So for example, when I went to university, my major was in human rights, right? And after that, I had a minor in Arabic. So I would say, you know, my bachelor's degree, major, human rights, minor, Arabic, and any awards that I got. Then, your next level of education, field of study, focus, awards. And then, you know, if you have another one, include it. But you don't want to include your high school education. It's just not important, and it's going to make your resume too long. Okay. So, let me check and see if there are any questions about your education part of the CV. We will look very fast before going on to the next part, which is probably the most important. Okay. Next, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about work experience. Now this is very, very important in a CV because, remember, your CV is just to see if you are qualified for the job or not. Now, the biggest place this will come from is your work experience, okay? Now, your work experience should always be relative or relevant to the job you are applying for. So here is a specific example. I have had lots of different jobs in the past. Lots. Do I put every single one on my CV? No, definitely not. So, when I was applying for my job here at Reach Out, I only included work experience that showed I was qualified, that I had the skills to work as a teacher. So, if I worked before at a university teaching, should I include it? Yes, absolutely. If when I was 14 years old, I cooked hamburgers at McDonald's, do I need to include that? Probably not. It's not helpful. It doesn't show them that I have any skills that will help me with the job I'm going to do. Remember, your resume should always be written for the job you are going to do. If I am going to be a journalist, it is not important that they know or that my employer knows that I can cook. It's not going to help me be a journalist. It's going to make my CV very long, and it's unnecessary. So we won't include it. Okay. So we don't want to include any work experience, which is unnecessary, right? So, only choose jobs that are the most relevant to what you have done or to the job that you want to do. So here, the next thing that you want to remember is when you are writing your job or your work experience, there are certain ways that you want to include it. Okay? So, the first thing you want to include is the name of your position, right? The name of your position. This tells the employer right away what kind of job you did before. Were you management? Were you just working in sales? Were you an intern? Right? It will tell them what kind of position you had and what kind of responsibilities you had. So, the first thing you want to include is the name of your position. After that, you want to include where you worked, right? You want to tell them where that was. So that could be something like, my previous job was English language coordinator at Ahmed East, Ramallah, in Palestine. So that tells them what my job was, who I worked for, and where I worked. Why do you think it's important to include where you worked? Does anyone have a guess? It's important because it shows people, do you travel a lot? If I am an American and I'm applying for a job in Cairo, it's going to help them for them to see that I have lived in the Middle East before. It's not the same, but I've lived here, I've worked here, and that means culturally it will be easier for me. That's a good thing for my employer to know because it makes me look good. It also shows them that I am already here. I am ready to work and that I can travel. That's important. All right, so here, the next part of your work experience on the CV is probably the most important part of all. It is your description of your job. Now, this is where you really get to explain and describe yourself. But remember, your CV needs to be short, which means for each job, you only want to describe your skills or your job responsibilities in 1 or 2 examples. Now here, this is very important because this is what shows your employer what you can do, right? Or what were your previous responsibilities? What are some things that you did before which allow you to be qualified to work in your next job? So, here is an example. Let's say that my job description is, I don't know. My last position was copy editor at Cairo Daily News, Cairo, Egypt. After that, I want to explain what some of my responsibilities were, maybe in 2 or 3 bullet points. This is where I'm going to show them all of my skills. So I might say something like, edited and organized newspaper articles on a timely basis. Something very short and simple, or something like worked in an office with a group of people. The second one, it's a little different. It's not as good, right? That's because when you're describing your skills, there's a strategy. There's a way that you want to do it, and that is by using active verbs, okay? So here, though, my next question is, what are active verbs, right? I mean, we study English. We know the difference between an active verb or a state verb. But here, an active verb is a verb that shows strength. It shows power in what you've done. So if you are using active verbs and not passive verbs, you're going to be making a much better impression, right? So here is an example. I could say, worked in an office and worked in an office with a group of people. Worked, it's not a very strong verb. I mean, of course you worked, you had a job. You're going to want to choose a different job. So I worked in an office. What else could I say? And I worked well with groups. So I worked in a group of people. What's a word I can use to talk about working in a group? Coordinate, right? I coordinated with other people. See here, coordinate is the better word because it shows us that it is more specific than work. It tells us work, but it tells us more, right? Coordinate tells us someone worked with a group of people and succeeded. So this is a good verb to use. What about, here's another one. Went to meetings. Went to meetings. Is went to a very strong verb here? Does it give us a sense of strength? To me, not really. I wouldn't say went to. Like went to meetings. Okay, to go to a meeting. What does that mean? You attended meetings, right? Or you, if you were the leader, you conducted them, or you organized them, right? One of the reasons that we want to use these words is they show us as active. They show us as actively doing something. Went to, it doesn't show that we're working, right? Worked with doesn't tell us how we worked. But if we're using words like attended, organized, coordinated, directed, right? It shows that we, as employees, were active. We did things. We actually did our job. We worked. Your employer wants to see this. If you're using weak verbs, maybe they will think that you're lazy. Maybe they will think that you don't work very hard or you don't try very hard, that you are just a passive actor at your job. If your employer gets an idea that you're lazy or that you don't do a lot of work, do you think you're going to get the job or not? Definitely not. I can honestly say, having been in that position before, I have applied for jobs where I wasn't careful about my resume, I wasn't careful with my CV, and with my work experience, I used a lot of passive verbs. I didn't even get an interview. In fact, most of the time, I'd never heard from them again. It's because when they were going through hundreds of CVs, they came across mine, which didn't look strong. It didn't look like I was an active person. And because of that, I didn't get the job. So here, let's go over some other good verbs, some good active verbs, which really show someone to be a strong person, right, or a strong worker. So let's think about, well, here, make, the verb to make. So let's say that in my last job I say made reports and made programs for the organization. In the comments, can someone give me another verb that you think is a stronger version of make, of made, right? Something that we do. Can someone send me maybe a message or something about, or just another word, something you think is better than create? Oh, I just said one. Something that's better than make, okay? Maybe send in an idea. Any ideas you have to make something? Another word you think that means make. Any ideas? Just going to refresh. Okay. Well, here is another example that is better than make. Produce, create, design, develop, right? All of these things show that you're active. If you are building something, you are creating it, you are designing it, you are developing it, that means you are taking your energy, your work, and using it to help others. Okay, so you always want to include in this section, when describing your skills, what you can do. And this is a good place to fit in any talents you have, right? Remember, we want to keep our resumes short. So maybe instead of saying at the end all of the skills you have, you can include it here in your description. So, for example, if I were writing a CV, I would not write, like, you know, I made meetings and helped in the office. I would say I organized and conducted meetings while supporting the office in both English and Arabic. I'm using active verbs that make me look strong, and I've also found a way to include that I speak Arabic. This is an important skill that a lot of places would want to see. And now, I don't have to include it later on. They see it as part of my work skills. It connects the idea that I work, I'm responsible, and I can use more than one language. For all of you watching, this is very important because it will show that you can use Arabic and English. Okay. So, we're just going to go over a couple other good words that you can use, right? So let's say you want to work in journalism or for a newspaper or anything that's about writing. You could use something like write, that's okay. But if you said something like translated, edited, compiled, built, organized, or presented, these are all good verbs to use that show that you're active and could be appropriate for that job. Or another example could be, let's say you're working in sales, right? You want to work in sales, that's a good job. So instead of saying something just like sold, you could do that, or was a salesman. Do something like earned, right? You earned something, you managed something. You improved something. You increased sales, right? Or you, I don't know, you solved problems. You planned new ideas, or you collected more data and information. Verbs like these are going to give you a much stronger CV in the initial process. People will remember you, and they will be able to ask more questions. You also look better. And if it looks like you have a lot of skills, they might want to hire you over someone else. Okay, so we're going to take a minute and take some questions, okay? So here, yep, we've got some good verbs thrown in for make, create, design, all very good, build, develop. All right, so here we have a question though from Amr. Amr writes, what if I'm a fresh graduate and I have no experience? What should I do? Well, we've all been there, or we are there now, or we're about to be there, if you're still a student. The thing is, remember, no one ever starts having job experience, right? We all will have a first job or a first responsibility, and we'll talk next, in the next section, about different things that you can do to help your resume, to help your CV, if you don't have anything yet, or if you don't have a lot of experience. This is also where a skills resume could come in, or a skills CV, but we will talk about that in a minute. First, just so we're all clear, does anyone have any questions about the work experience or education parts of your CV? Do you have any questions about those so far? Just type them into the comments, and I will answer any questions you have. But no. I remember, it's funny, the first time that I ever was applying for a job, I was so frustrated because I kept thinking that, you know, I've just spent all this money on university, I've spent all this money to work, and everyone says that to get a job, I need experience. But to get experience, I need a job. So to get a job, I need experience. To get a job, I need experience. Right? To get experience, I need a job. And here I feel like it's a circle that goes around and around and around, and I'm just trapped in the middle of it. I can't get experience because I can't get a job, and I can't get a job because I don't have experience. This is normal, and what we're going to talk about next is ways that you can get around that without experience. Well, or you can get experience or show yourself qualified for a job. But before we start that, okay, so Safwan says, I'm undergraduate and my education would be so short. Don't worry, Safwan. My CV right now, I only have an undergraduate degree as well. That's okay. You don't need to include lots and lots of things because most people are only going to have an undergraduate degree, or they might have no degree at all. That's okay. I mean, remember, the education gives people an idea of what kind of degree you have, but after that, it's in the work experience, or the job experience, or sections after that, that you can really get more information and you can show skills that you have that maybe you didn't get from working. There are lots of different ways to do it. That's why this is about CV strategies. All right, are there any other questions or comments from anyone? Anything you would like to know? All right, so Shaima asks, what about my products? Can I tell them about it? Well, that depends. If you're talking about a project for school or for university, yes, but you have to be careful. So let's say that you are working on a school project that's just for your engineering class. It's just a normal assignment. This you don't want to include. Why? Because it's normal. It doesn't make you look special. But if you are working on a project independently, right? Maybe as a project you do outside of school or work, or you're developing a project or a group in the university, yes, absolutely include this. So, for example, one thing that I include on my CV, even though I only have my undergraduate degree, I was also part of the newspaper when I worked there. And I worked there for several years, and I became an editor, one of their senior editors. I put this on my CV, even today. The reason I do it is because it shows that I can handle responsibility. I've worked in a position of leadership, even only at university. I've been part of a group or an organization that has made things. Absolutely. So if you've been part of a club or even a formal sports team at your university, this is something that you can easily use on your CV, especially in the beginning when you don't have a lot of stuff. Anything that you can use that shows them that you have good skills, right? Or that you have leadership, or anything that will make you look good, really, can find a way into your CV, right? Especially something like being part of a club or an organization at university. Again, you want to be careful what organization you say you were part of, because if you were part of an organization at the university called the I like to not go to class and smoke cigarettes club, probably doesn't help you, right? But if it is a legitimate or a clear organization, then it's definitely something you can include on your CV or your resume. All right. Are there any other questions that students you have about either your job experience or your education? Feel free to ask anything, or, you know, if I said something that wasn't clear, ask again. Unfortunately, I can't hear you or see you, so all I can see are your Facebook comments. So please feel free to post any question you have. Any questions? If not, we will just continue. Let me see. Okay. Well then, we're going to continue on to the next part. So, for those of you that maybe don't have a lot of work experience, or maybe you are just coming out of university and have no work experience, and only a bachelor's degree, here is some of the stuff you can do next. Okay? So the next part, which I would include, if possible, is volunteer experience. Does anyone know what volunteer experience is? It's when you do a job for no money. You volunteer. You say, I will go in, I will work, and you don't have to pay me anything. Now, you might think, well, that's crazy. Who wants to work for free? The answer is not many people. Either people who are really rich, or don't need money, or who don't want money. But here's something that could be very good for you. Let's say that you just finished your university. The only job you ever had before was working in your family's restaurant or at your family's store, just simple things. So you're worried about not people who volunteer. It's not great because you're not making money, but if you are worried about your CV or you don't have enough qualifications in work or education, you can put in a section about volunteer work, right? So your volunteer work could be anything. And it's a great way to get experience without having to find a job. And also, if you show on your resume that you have done volunteer work, chances are the person reading it is going to see, all right, well, they haven't had a job, but they're working. And if they're choosing to work for no money, that means they must be trying very hard. They must be working very hard. It makes you look very good. In my experience, I have never seen a resume where someone had volunteer work and have the resume look bad. It actually almost always looks great. So, for those of you that don't have any experience so far, then yes, volunteer work is a great place to go. All right, we have a question from Safwan. All right, what about trainings? For example, engineering trainings in companies. Should you include this on your CV? Yeah, I think you should, especially if you don't have a lot of previous work. For example, if you ever did a program or a short workshop at an organization, see, for example, here, engineering trainings. If you're looking for a job as an engineer and you show that you've done training for it, then yes, you should include that. Because here, this is like work experience. In fact, it's work experience, but instead of saying I worked there for a long time, just say trained, like say the position as trainee or volunteer. You can include this very easily. It makes it look like you have more skills, which you do, and it helps build your resume. It helps it look clearer. After you've had a few jobs, you probably don't need to include this. But at this point, it's definitely not a bad idea, right? It's something that you can work with. It's something you can use to describe yourself, to describe your responsibilities or your skills, and it makes you look good. So things like job trainings or any conferences or training sessions you've had for different jobs, yes, go ahead, include them. I think that would be very good. Okay. So the next part, well, let's recap on volunteer work very fast. So volunteer work, it's a great thing to include in your resume, in your CV. If you are a recent graduate or you're a new person, or if you're looking for your first job, it's a good thing to use. Or if you don't have any volunteer experience, but you need experience, volunteering is a great way to help build your resume, give you skills so you can get a job, get some experience, and it also makes you look really good. So here's how we would organize the resume so far. We would start with your personal information, name, contact information, education, work experience, and if you have it, volunteer experience. That could be next. Or if you don't have work experience, you can just put volunteer experience under work. Okay? So the next part that we're talking about is, we've talked about volunteer experience. Oh, and with volunteer experience, you should be describing it the same way you describe your work experience. Use active verbs, describe it in a short, clear way, right? Something simple. Remember, if your resume is too long, if your CV is too long, they're not going to read it. So you want to make it nice and clear. All right. After this, we're getting on to a little bit long in the CV. So here is something that you could include if you need to. All right? So here it would be skill. Oh, okay. Are we back? Okay, it looks like we're back. Sorry about that, everyone. We had some internet connectivity issues, but we should be able to work now. Okay. So, hold on just a minute. Yeah, we should be good. So, we're going to continue from where we left off, which is talking about your skills section on the CV. All right? Your skills section is something that you can include after your work or volunteer experience to include skills that maybe you could not find a way to describe in the work or volunteer sections. Okay, so you guys should be able to see me now. So, as I was somewhat ironically saying before the connection got lost, one thing that our generation is good at, by and large, is using technology, the internet, social media. So, if you can't find a way to include your technical in your job description or in your discussion of volunteer work, then maybe you can find a way to include it in your skills section. You could say something like fluent in social media, including Facebook, Twitter, email, Pinterest, Instagram, whatever people are using nowadays, I don't know. But, sorry, I'm getting weird messages again. Is anyone there? I can't see any comments right now, so just let me see if I can get this to work out very fast. Once that's all good, we can get back to business. This way, I find it funny that we're discussing technology and how technology is something that's very useful, right? But, sorry. Yep, now we're back. Wait, get back. Well, we talk about technology as I am failing to make technology work. But it seems like we're all back and ready. And we got a few questions while I was out. So, things like participating in activities in university. This can be a great thing to include, especially if the activity shows that you are skilled and qualified for a job. Like I said in my example, one of my first jobs after university was I was a writing instructor. One of the reasons I got that job was because while I was at university, I was part of the school newspaper where I was an editor. So even though it wasn't part of my exact education or work, I included it because it showed a skill that I had, right? And about trainings. Another question from Merhan about trainings. Trainings I would include in work experience. Remember, most training is for a job, so you want to include it when you're talking about work experience. So describe it the same way you would any other job, what you did, when you did it, and what some of the responsibilities or skills you got from that training were. And another question about what about courses that I took? So courses that you took at university, do you want to include it or not? No. You don't want to include the courses you took for the one reason that we all have taken a lot of courses at university, and we don't need to list every single one, right? Field of study, maybe your minor, and some of your achievements or some of the awards you got at university, or organizations you were a part of. If they wanted to know what classes you took, what your score at university was, these are things they can ask you, but I don't think it's appropriate to put on the CV, just because it makes it too long. And also, not all of us had great GPAs or scores from university, and we probably don't want to show that to everyone. Okay, so back to where we were before. We were talking about skills, right? We were looking at skills that you could use to add. So for example, for all of you, one skill that you can, of course, include is language. You can all speak English, otherwise you wouldn't be listening to me right now. So that's a skill you can include. I would try and find a way to put it in your job description, or your description of job responsibilities, but I don't think it's necessary to put it there. And if you can't, put it under a skill section. So good things to include here would be things like computer skills, language skills, if you work well with others or work better alone, or, you know, other random things. But another question, what about languages? Absolutely. Include this in your skill set. If you can't include it in your job responsibility description. So if you are talking about, I speak English, Arabic, and Spanish, include that either in my resume, in my CV, or in my skills section. But remember, having the ability to speak many languages, even if you don't need all of them for your job, it's still impressive, and it shows that you're intelligent people who work hard, which always is good for you. Okay, so the next part I wanted to talk about, well, all right, no, other things to talk about in the skills section. Remember, with skills, all of us are very talented people. So skills like languages, computer technologies, the ability to work well in groups and collaborate, these are important. Do my future employers need to know every skill I have, every single one? Probably not. Do they need to know that I can touch my nose with my tongue? Do they need to know that? No. It's a fun skill to show people at parties, not for a CV. What about I can put my whole fist in my mouth? They don't need to know that. So any skills that you include on your resume should only be skills that help you in the job, right? Of course, you're all very special people with lots of different skills, but if that skill is not going to help you at the job, remember, it makes your resume, your CV, too long. We want to make it short. And if it is too long, people won't read it. Also, it's just not professional. It's not necessary. So there's that. While we're talking about that, let's talk about some things that we should not include, right? So we remember from the beginning, we said we do not want to include personal information. This would be things like if you are married or single, if you are, what is your religion? What are your politics? How old are you? This is personal information, which is not necessary, and you probably should not include on a resume, on an English resume. If they ask for it for an Egyptian resume or an Egyptian CV, then it's okay. But if you're submitting an English CV, I would not include them. And this goes back to a comment from way back at the beginning, from just a minute. Let me see if I can give credit. Where is it? From Nanoman. I'm not sure if that's your real name or not, but it was about hobbies. Where can you include your hobbies in your CV? My answer to that question is nowhere. Remember, your hobbies, while they make you interesting as a person, are not really appropriate to be included in a CV. It's not that they're not important, it's that they're not important to your employer. So, for example, one of my hobbies that I love very much is cooking. I love to cook a lot. I cook all the time. I'm actually pretty good at cooking, to be honest. But when I was applying for this job, I did not say that one of my hobbies was cooking, because it's not something that my boss needs to know. CV, you want it to be professional. You want it to be clear. So including certain things which are not professional, such as your religion or private information or your hobbies, they can actually make you look worse, right? So if you are trying to write a resume where maybe you don't have a lot of work experience and you're worried about your skills, but you want to have more space, so you write a big list of all of your hobbies, it's not going to make you look good. It's actually going to do the opposite. It's going to make it look like you are nervous or that you're not confident. And if your employer senses this, or the person reading your resume senses this, chances are they will not think of you positively. So hobbies that you have, like I like reading and writing and cooking and traveling and shopping, this is your personal life. The things you like to do in your free time are your hobbies. Is your work time? No. I like doing it, but it's not my free time. So I would not include my hobbies for a job where I'm not going to be doing them. If I'm doing my hobbies at work, that means I'm not doing my job. And if I'm listing them on my CV, it means that I'm very focused on my hobbies to the point that maybe I'm not going to be doing my own work. Maybe at work I'm going to be playing video games, or I'm going to be playing on Facebook. If I am an employer and I'm looking at resumes, I don't want to see that. So hobbies are something you do not want to include on your resume, on your CV, almost ever. If, for example, you send in your CV and they give you an interview and they ask you about yourself, yeah, then you can talk about your hobbies. But remember, if you are one of 100 CVs in a pile, and half of your CV, which is already too long, is listing your hobbies, there's going to be a problem, right? It's going to look like you are not working hard, or that you're not All right. Are you guys back? Can you see me? All right. It looks like all right. So, you guys, I should be back and seeing you. What I wanted to ask, are there any questions about your skills section or about your what not to include, like hobbies? All right, we have a question here from Shaima. Some people said you should put your certificates on CVs, especially English language courses. Here, I think that this is actually something that you should and could put on very easily. So presumably, all of you have or are taking classes at Reach Out, and you should very much include this. For example, you don't need to list every level you've taken here if it was conversation or general. You just want to you might want to include maybe in your skills section or maybe even at the end of your education section that you have been taking language courses. Just say where and for how long. This should give them an idea of your ability to speak that language. Maybe they'll think you're either very, very good at it, or it's evidence, it's proof that you know how to speak those languages. So, and I would include that actually in the education section, maybe at the end, after you list your degrees. Or if you don't want to include it there, you could include it in the skills section, or even other information, general information. Okay. Are there any other questions? Questions about anything so far? Anything? No? All right. Well, if they come up, I will look at them in just a minute and answer any questions you have. So, the next part of your CV, and probably the last part that you will need, is about references. Now, what are references? References are any person who you've worked for or a professor that your future employer can contact for extra information. So let's say that they are reading your CV, they like you. They're thinking about calling you for an interview, and they're going to, but they want a little more. If you list your references, they can ask your references about you. Like, are they a good worker? How do you know this person? How long have you worked with them? All of this is a good way for the employer to find out information about you. So when you include your reference, you should write in just something simple like the person's name, their position at their job, and maybe their email. Right? Just something very, very simple. How many references do you think you need? Any ideas? One or two or maybe three, never more than that. If you're including a bunch of references, what happens is it looks like you're trying to show how many people like you, right? And you're trying to make yourself look really good, like saying, look at me, look at all of my friends who will say I'm a good person. And you are good people. But if your employer is looking at the CV and sees that a lot of your stuff is about references, or you have 7 references for working as an intern, you don't need that. I would say 1 to 3 is plenty. In fact, I normally only give 1. So who makes for an appropriate reference? Who do you think? Does your mother make a good reference for you? Probably not. Why? Of course, your mother loves you, probably, and she will give you a good reference. The same could be said about anyone's mother. Your reference should be someone who knows you, but in a more professional way. So, for example, family members are normally not good references because everyone knows they're going to give you a good reference. Maybe one of your bosses from before, or your manager from a previous job, or a professor you had at the university that you had a good relationship with. All of these could be good references, especially when you're first looking for jobs. Here's one thing you want to be careful of. And this is a mistake that I have not made, but people have made with me. When you, what are you saying, show off? Thanks, Amr. No. Here is a mistake that I have made, or that has been made before. If you want to use someone as a reference, you probably want to make sure that they like you. Because if you use someone who has a bad reference or gives you a bad reference, it's going to be much harder for you to get that job. In fact, it's going to be very, very difficult. So, you really, really don't want to do that. Also, what do you think? Do you think it's a good idea to ask your reference before you put them on your resume, put them on your CV? Yes. You definitely, definitely should ask someone before you write their name as your reference. First reason, if they're going to write you a bad reference or give you a bad reference, you can find out before then. And also, it's just the correct thing to do. For example, if someone asks for a reference from me or puts me as a reference, sometimes in the past I have gotten emails or phone calls from people and I'm like, who is this? What do they want from me? Before I realize that they are asking for a reference that one of their former students or one of my former students used my name for without asking me and didn't tell me any information about the job, and I didn't know I was this person's reference. So it was surprising for me because this person just decided to use me without asking. And I gave this person an okay reference, right? All right. I gave this person an okay reference, but it would have been better if I had, or if he had asked me first. Okay? And to Amar's comment, I agree with you. It should be one. Okay, so it looks like I'm back again. Sorry for the constant interruptions of the internet. It's not ideal for me either. I freak out a little bit. All right, so here we have another question from Ahmed about what about writing on request in the part of the reference? So what do you think of this? Should you write in your references available on request? What do you think? You really should not, right? Here's the reason. Think about it like this. If you are, remember, your future employer, the one reading your CV, is probably reading hundreds of these, dozens of these, right? Who knows how many? And they are a busy person. You are the one who is working, trying to get the job. You want to make their life easier. If you write references available on request, that means they need to now contact you and ask you for a reference for yourself, so they can then contact this reference and hear back on that reference. It makes them take a lot of time that they don't want, right? For example, if I got a resume that said references available upon request, I would probably think initially that, all right, like this person, maybe he thinks he's better than this job. Or maybe she thinks she's too good for this, and like, you know, it's not about what she wants or what we want. She's just going to give us her references if she feels like it. It feels almost rude, because you would be making me do more work than I want to do. Especially if I really want a reference, and there's another CV here where the reference is clear and available, and maybe they're about the same. Yours might give me just enough of a negative impression that I'm going to take it out of the pile, right? I'm not going to consider you for the job. And you could write on request, but I don't think it's a good idea, just because it can give the impression that you're arrogant or that you're being rude. Neither of which are very good for a job. Okay, any other questions so far? All right, here I'm just going to review everything we've talked about so far, and this is for the chronological resume. Chronological. So the first part of the chronological resume is your general information. This is your name, your address, your mobile number, and a professional email address. Nothing like, I don't know, Ahmed loves cars, or black beauty lover. None of this. It looks unprofessional. You don't want to do that. All right, so that is the first part, your general information. Name, address, mobile, professional email. After that, you want to include your education, starting with your highest degree. So if that's a master's, that's a master's, right? Or it goes PhD, master's, bachelor's. With this, you also want to list where you got your degree, what your field of study was, what your minor or your focus of study was, and also any awards, organizations, clubs you were a part of. After that, you want to include your work or job experience. This is the job that is most relevant to the job you're applying for. So with this, you would want to include things like what job you worked, where you worked, when you worked there. what was the name of your position, and give some, a few bullet points about what some of your responsibilities were. And remember, when we're giving these job responsibilities, we always want to use active verbs, not passive. So, went to, was, worked. These aren't clear. We want to use something strong, like developed, created, designed, organized, evaluated, planned, right? Improved. No, so that would be a great thing. And then after that, for a lot of people who won't have a lot of work experience and maybe only a bachelor's degree, we can include things like volunteer experience or other skills, right? And at the end, we're going to include our references, right? Maybe 1 to 3 references at the most. Some places will require 3. From a professional relationship. This could be a professor, your boss from your last job, anything like this. And now Amar has a question. If I'm going to do a master's in university in France, should I get a recommendation letter from any professor or from a professor who studied there before? This is actually a very interesting question. So, he is getting a recommendation letter, not for another job, but for a university in France for his master's. Here, I would say, if you have a professor who has a good relationship with you, that is the first thing. You and this professor need to have a good relationship. If you have a good relationship, and they studied at this school in the past, yes, they'd be very valuable, because they are someone who was there before. They will understand what this program wants and is looking for, and they can write a stronger recommendation letter for you. But on that note, let's take a minute to talk about recommendation letters, right? A recommendation letter, it's like a reference, but instead of just including the name of the person and their title and their email, you have a letter from them that is written about you. This is a letter you can submit with your CV. Now, I don't normally use recommendation letters, and they're more common for getting into universities or schools than they are for jobs. Most jobs just use references. But if you have a letter of recommendation from someone else, then that could be a very good thing, and it can help. But remember, if it's in your CV, it might make your CV longer, right? So they'll see your CV with all of the information, and then on the next page, your letter of recommendation. Well, this isn't bad, because it means your CV is short and to the point. You still run the risk of having your employer not read your letter of recommendation because there's simply too many CVs to read. Okay? So, and then the other things we want to remember, just going over review in a chronological inventory, are things not to include. This would be personal or private information, like most of age, if you were married, if you were a man, a woman, your birthday, what your religion is, what your politics are, your hobbies. These are things we generally don't want to include because they are private information that our employer doesn't need to know about and doesn't care about. Okay? So, that is the chronological CV. From start to finish, you go general information, education, work experience, volunteer experience, skills, references. Right? Very simple. This is the most common CV form. For most people, this is the CV form you should and will be using. But to take a moment, we're going to look at another semi-common CV, right? It's not as common as the chronological CV, but it is still useful. It is called the skills CV. The skills CV, we don't write it or use it the same way we would use a chronological CV. A skills CV is specifically for people who either don't have very much experience, like at all, like don't have a degree, don't have a job, or never had a job, or have a degree but zero work experience, or for someone who is changing their career, right? So a skills CV is different than a normal CV. Instead of showing the work you have done and showing your skills through those examples, it just shows what those skills are, right? So you start it the same way. You start it with name, address, email address, mobile number, same thing. And if you've got the education, you would put it next. But instead of, say, work experience or volunteer experience, you go straight into your skills, right? And here, you don't write simple skills like you did before. You want to show that you know that you have exactly the skills you need to do the job. So if I am applying for the position of being a doctor, no, that's not a good example. I'm applying to be the position of in sales. I want to work in sales. I want to be a salesman. I have never done sales before. My degree isn't in it. I have no work experience in it. All I've ever done is teaching and, working in journalism. So I could write skills CV, where I write at the top, under my skills, that through working as a teacher, I've gotten very good at explaining things and getting people to think what I want them to think, and I'm very personable, and I get along well with other people. These are skills which are important for a salesman, but hard to show if all of my experience says I'm a teacher. I would just want to find a way to explain that the skills I have qualify me for the job that I want, even though the work experience I have doesn't show that, right? So maybe I could say that through being working in journalism, I learned lots about the financial sector from reading articles and editing articles, but I've never worked in it, but my previous position gave me a lot of information to understand it. This is why I would write a skills CV, right? If I'm changing careers, or I don't have a lot of work experience. And the only difference is right after you have your education, you include just your skills and how they are going to let you do the job effectively. So for some of you, this might be a useful CV to write, but it's not very common, and most of the time, people will be looking at chronological CVs. I would say that you should only write a skills CV if your chronological CV is just not possible. It won't work. You don't have the experience or the skills, or you don't have, or you don't have what you need to write a chronological CV, or if you're changing careers. Okay, so I'm going to pause now and have moments for any questions, any comments, anything you have. Because what we're going to do next is we're going to do a short activity, right? We're going to even do it through the internet. But before we go on to that activity, I want you to ask me any questions that you have, any comments about a skills CV, a chronological CV, what to include, what not to include, why do we include it, how do we include it, what do we do, right? Just let me know if you have any questions at all. Okay? So, if you don't have any questions right now, one thing that you can do is go to the very first comment on the Facebook page. The very first one, well, I should say the bottom comment, the very end. And there are going to be two links. These are two different links for CVs, right? They are two sample CVs, but one of them is correct and one of them is not correct, right? You would want to look at each CV and then try and figure out which one is the correct CV, which one is the incorrect CV, and what are some of the mistakes on the incorrect CV, right? And these are just anything that you see or think of, okay? Let me see, are there any other questions? All right. All right, so here, a question from Chema. A lot of doctors say that you must create a CV on a social website like LinkedIn or JobMaster. This is actually, like, is this important? This actually, I don't think it's necessary. It can be very helpful if you are trying to find jobs because it's a good way to connect with other people, and it's a good way that someone can search you professionally. They can ask you, they can see you as a professional person and ask you. It's also a good way to spread your name around to a variety of different people or different employers who might be looking for employees. For example, I have a LinkedIn profile. I believe the last time I checked, that LinkedIn profile was about 7 months ago. And I've only had this job for about 3 months. So it shows you that a lot of people don't use it very much, but they might, right? It's not necessary, but it is possible. All right. Are there any other comments or questions? All right. So Art asks us about hobbies, right? We want to remember that when we are constructing a CD in English, we don't want to include our hobbies. Our hobbies are part of our personal or private information. If we are including them in our CV, it makes it a little bit less professional, and it makes it seem like we're maybe trying to fill space or sell ourselves. Another way to think about it is hobbies are something that we do in our free time. If we are at work or if we are working, it is not free time, right? We will be doing a lot of work. We should not be doing the things we like to do all the time. So, if you're writing about a lot of your hobbies, your resume or your CV is no longer focused on just your skills as a professional. It's now focused on your personal life or your private activities, neither of which are appropriate for a professional CV. I would not include your hobbies. If they ask about your hobbies in an interview, that's fine. That means they just want to get to know you. But for the CV stage, you don't want to discuss your hobbies because it will make your CV too long. It makes your CV unprofessional. And it means that you probably won't get called for an interview, or you will be less likely to get called for an interview. Okay. Are there any more questions? Any more questions or comments before we look? All right, where are those CVs you want us to evaluate? So if you go to the very, very first page, or the very, very first comment in this thread, all the way at the bottom, from Reach Out Development NGO, right? Right? You can see that there's CV1 with a link and CV2 with a link. Okay? So you just want to look at each one, right? Look at each one of these. One of these CVs is a correct CV. The other one is not. All right? You just want to look at which one do you think is correct, CV1 or CV2, and which one is not. Okay, so Amr says that CV1 is wrong. Why do you think CV1 is wrong, right? And he's given us a few examples. Here he says it has hobbies, requests, age, birthday. If we look at CV1 for Michael Mitchell's, it has his age and his birthday at first. All right. After that, it has his education, right? It's okay. All right, I see a lot of things. All right, that looks normal. But here it says his secondary school, his high school. Here you probably don't need to include this, right? We don't need secondary school. After that, we have work experience, right? We have a few different things here. But with work experience, there's a few other problems. Can anyone see what those problems are? What do you think? See if we can get any ideas. Or how is it different from CV2? Right? How is CV2 different? See if we can get any ideas. And maybe pay special attention to the organization of the work or of the of the work experience. All right. Okay. Also, Safwan asks, right, in skills CV, how could I put my skills professionally? What you would want to do is remember, if you are writing a skills CV, it needs to be extremely specific for a job. So you should know exactly what the responsibilities in that job are and how to talk about yourself for those responsibilities. So if I am going to switch from being a teacher into sales, I need to explain how the skills I have from being a teacher qualify me to work in sales. So I might say, through many classroom hours with students, I have learned how to speak to large groups of people and convince them of ideas and explain things in an effective, professional way. I also work very well with other people and am very skilled in using language to convey ideas and to make myself clear. Moreover, from my work in editing and working in journalism, I had a lot of time to read about and study the financial sector or the sales sector to understand more information about how to sell things or how to be an effective salesman. Right? I just want to use clear, correct English that shows that skills I already have are effective for the job that I want. Okay. And Amr says, cook CV1. What do you mean by that, Amr? You want to cook the CV? What exactly do you mean? Or does anyone else see any problems or differences between CV1 and CV2? Can anyone see any differences? Any ideas? Right. So here we have a comment. CV2 is arranged with no high school, no hobbies, no requests, age, birthday. Right. But also, look at CV2. Look at where it talks about work experience. Which CV do you think looks better, CV1 or CV2? Which looks cleaner? Which looks more professional? Right? For example, in CV1, when they describe your business responsibilities, it's written in sentences. In CV2, it's written as bullet points. Which do you think is better? Have you written as bullet points or written as sentences? Right. Here, it says in the other skills section, I can cook and work with computers. Now, this person looks like they are applying for a job in sales or finance. It is probably not important that they can cook. Okay? Anything else you can see? Something that you think is different between CV1 and CV2? What do you think? What do you think? Any ideas? Points, right. Amr says there are bullet points. Here, bullet points is better than writing it in sentences. The reason why is that with bullet points, what happens is you get it in a shorter, clearer version. Now remember, whoever is reading your CV has a lot of CVs to read. And if yours is taking them a long time, or if it's too long, they're going to stop. They're too busy and they don't have time. So, if yours is arranged in clear bullet points, it makes it very easy for them to read quickly, and it gives them a strong idea of that person. If it is written just in single sentences, it's not clear, and it will not be effective. All right? Any other points or differences that you see? Right, CV2 has references, right? So here it has a reference, right? Just of a single person, whereas CV1 says references available upon request. Remember, we don't want to say references available upon request because it makes it seem like we are arrogant, or it makes us seem like we are rude. We don't want to come off that way, so we just want to write our references as that. Just the name, the position, and their contact information. All right? Any other differences we see between CV1 and CV2? Anything else? Which one is longer? Which one is longer? What do you think? Any ideas? Any thoughts? You can see that the second resume, the second CV, is much shorter. It's on only one page as opposed to 2 pages for resume 1. So you probably want to keep your resume to be about 1 page, because if it's 2 pages or more, they'll have to take a long time to read it. At the same time, if your resume is less than half a page, it's going to look like you have no experience or qualifications. So what you'll want to do is just try and find a balance where it is not too long but not too short. A good length, especially for people who are just finishing university or beginning to work, is to have it be no more than a page, right? No more than a page should be just fine. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments? Right? And if you like, you can look at CV2 as a reference for how to make your own CV, right? Maybe in the format or the organization, you can use that in a way that maybe you can build your own CV like it. And it's a very simple chronological CV, so it can be used and it's quite helpful. But it is just one option of many. All right. Any other questions? All right. So Shaina says, I think skills CV. Yes. For some people, a skills CV will be better, right? And that's okay. Here, though, remember that a chronological CV is more common. And generally, it tends to be more successful. So I recommend that you continue to try and make a chronological CV if possible. However, if not, a skills CV can work. It is more difficult to make, though. If you make a skills CV, you just want to remember that as you are making it, you have to know exactly what you need for the job you want. Because skills CVs, they're a little bit risky. It just means that you are trying to show that you're qualified for a job which you normally would not look qualified for. They absolutely can work, and sometimes they can be more powerful than a normal CV. But you do have to be careful with them, because you can also make it look like you're not qualified or that you're not very interested. You just want to be careful. Right. Exactly, and Safwan points out that in CV2, they use active and strong verbs in the work experience section, where it is faster to read and gives a stronger impression. All right? So, any other comments or things that we noticed? Anything? Any ideas? Any last comments? Any thoughts? Right. In CV1, Safwan points out, it says, I also helped in sales. Here it has a lot of I helped, right? There's some strong verbs, but there are also lots of little mistakes. Here's a question that I'm going to ask, which it seems easy, but we should say it. What about making typos or small grammar mistakes in your CV? Do you think that this is a good thing or a bad thing? Very bad. I've heard from different people and also different employers, if they get a CV that has grammar mistakes or typos in it, what will happen is they will not use that CV. Even 1 or 2 mistakes is enough for them to throw it away. The reason for this is that in those CVs, well, remember, your CV, it's like a picture of yourself you send to someone else, right? So, and you want to make a good impression. If you send them a CV that has lots of grammar mistakes or little typos, they are going to think that you are sloppy. You don't care, you're not organized, and you are not being serious. If they think this about your CV, you are not getting an interview, you are not getting the job. You need to make sure before your CV is sent that there are almost 0 grammar mistakes. It should be almost perfect. Okay? Are there any final questions before we go? Because we are about to finish up. And also, if any of you have any questions or any comments, please feel free to contact Reach Out. We can provide you with copies of these CVs or any questions you might have. You can find me here every day, all the time, and I'm always available for questions. So please, feel free to come in and ask me questions at any time. And can you wait just 1 minute? We have a short announcement that I need to bring someone in for before we finish. 1 moment.
Yeah, what's happening with you?
Just the president wants to let the light bulb. Okay, let me move. Okay. Just anyways, I'm here. Just. Thanks, man.
All right, everyone. So sorry for the delay. I just needed to go and ask what I'm announcing because they didn't tell me totally. So, Reach Out is offering a customer service workshop at Saphir Hotel. It will be going on for 3 days, and it begins on June 19th. So please, if anyone is interested, follow us on Facebook and come in to ask questions during this period of classes if you would like to know anything more. All right, everyone. I have had a very nice time talking to you and asking about a few last questions. All right. All right, no more questions. Thanks a lot. And how many papers should I deliver in my CV? You should really only deliver about 1 paper, maybe two, if that's all you have, or if you need to. But for example, I almost always try to make sure that my resume is never more than 1 page. Sometimes it has to be, but I try not to. All right. Again, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to ask me at Reach Out by sending us a message through Facebook or coming in. Like I said, I'm here every day. And even though I didn't get to hear any of you, I've gotten to speak with some of you on Facebook. So that's all we have for today. It was great speaking with you. So I guess that concludes our first ever online workshop with Reach Out. It was great speaking with you, so have a good evening, and I will see you at Reach Out.